flood crisis in rural northwest Queensland is heartbreaking, unprecedented and catastrophic. Over the past week, we've seen some terrible images of suffering cattle in and around areas east of Mount Isa. After years of drought, many graziers reported more than a year's worth of rain in days. The consequences have been terrible. Vast expanses of pasture went underwater, leaving cattle in this important beef-producing area with few places to shelter. It's thought hundreds of thousands of cattle may have been killed by floodwaters and exposure, with those left at risk of starvation. More than a dozen helicopters, including from the Army, have been mobilised to distribute fodder and fuel. There's no doubt this is a huge blow to Australia's beef industry. For those working on the land, the consequences are likely to be big and long-lasting. Susan McDonald is an LNP Senate candidate for Queensland and was born and raised in the stricken region. The McDonald family properties are among those impacted by the devastating floods. But she fears for the future of not just the many cattle producers, but the towns that rely on them for survival. She spoke to Kerry Lonergan.
Susan, let's start with a guesstimate of the latest guesstimate on cattle losses. I've had a lot of figures. What's the latest?
Yeah. Kerry, the most recent number I'm hearing is about 500,000. I'm hearing numbers bigger than that, but we will probably never know the exact number. You know, calves have been born, they hadn't been branded, and stock will have gone out to sea. So the exact number we may never know, but it's going to be significant.
The extraordinary thing was that a lot of them died of exposure in mid-February in North Queensland. It's just astounding.
Yeah, and that's the tragedy. We had a perfect storm of events. You know, we've had bigger rain events, but this was a significant flood. The cold that came down with the monsoonal low, there wasn't a lot of ground cover. We're coming out of a drought conditions, and the cattle, you know, weren't as strong as we would have liked.
And people wearing jumpers in Cloncurry in February.
That's exactly right. You know, wearing a jacket and saying it's a bit cold. Doesn't take much for Queenslanders to put on a coat, but it was cold.
Now, property damage. I've heard of properties where people lost their horses, their dogs, their pets, their livestock, all the fences, of course, everything, their vehicles.
Yes, and that's why this recovery work is so important. You know, the disaster needs to be immediately addressed to ensure that people are safe, that they've got food, that they're being looked after, and as many stock as we can are being fed and saved. But we've very quickly got to move to new watering points. You know, dams have been washed away, troughs and pipelines, and fences, of course. So there's a lot of work to be done.
So you're speaking with the appropriate people in Canberra?
Yes. So I have to tell you that the councils have done an extraordinary job of coordinating work. AgForce has mapped and allowed people to contact them with what they need.
Now, your own personal interest up there, your properties, how do they fare?
Yeah, so the Cloncurry properties, we've been very fortunate. We had good rain, but it wasn't flooding the way it was further north. The properties further north has had floods and water's gone through the house. But, you know, compared to other people, we've been very fortunate. We're grateful.
City people keep talking to me about insurance. Insurance in far north Queensland is almost a dirty word with premiums, etc.
Yes.
That does not apply in these cases, does it, mostly?
No, it doesn't. And people don't insure for stock. And North Queensland, you're quite right. So there was a Senate inquiry into insurance in North Queensland that came out in December, and it's pretty hard reading. Most of the insurance companies have pulled out, and the ones who are left are charging premiums that almost discourage people from insuring.
Okay, let's finish on a positive note. All the water up there, 36 inches of rain in some parts. The Mitchell grass, will that boom, or was there a problem with silt and mud, etc.?
Look, I think you'll be amazed at how quickly the country recovers and the grass comes away. There's green shoots already. This is very rich, fertile land, so I don't think there'll be a problem. But, Kerry, if I could just say that what's important is that we start thinking about reconstruction in the region and real infrastructure development that hasn't been done for generations. I think now's the time to reinvest back into this, highly productive region of Australia, the Northwest.
Susan McDonald, thanks for your time on Landline today.
Thank you, Kerry.
G'day, I'm Clint Juster in northwest Queensland. I'm on one of the Australian Army's Taipan helicopters delivering fodder to northwest Queensland after some of the worst floods people here can remember. Communities are still coming to terms with the deaths of potentially hundreds of thousands of cattle in one of Australia's most important beef producing regions. You'll see my story next week on Landline.
A Queensland farming couple, weary of worrying about when it would rain, decided to sell up their home of more than 20 years to migrate to Tasmania. Rob and Sally McCreth have now survived 2 Tassie winters and haven't regretted the move south for a second. They've also discovered they're not the only weather refugees in the district, with several nearby farmers telling them they also sold up on the mainland in search of rain and green grass. Rob and Sally McCreth downsized from their cropping and beef property near Toowoomba for this small slice of Tasmania nearly 2 years ago. And this is what they moved for: green grass, rain, puddles and glorious mud.
Where we were in Queensland, we were both worried about climate change and long-term impacts and the projections for how things were going to become more difficult.
Farmers have a saying, where there's mud, there's money. And on their new farm in Deloraine in northern Tasmania, a wet winter means lots of grass. Grass for their own Angus cattle and the drought-struck herd they're adgisting from the mainland. And come summer, grass to be cut for hay and silage.
We had over 250 mils, I think, for July. That was it seemed quite wet. But who's complaining? You know, you get used to it. You just put on the right clothes and get on with it. You know, no point coming here and complaining about the wet.
No.
I think the average in where we were in Queensland was about 650 mils. Here it's supposed to be about 1,000 mils. But, you know, Queensland is very, very variable, up and down like a yo-yo. You know, go from big extremes to, highs to lows. Here, because it's an island stuck in the ocean, I think things tend to be a bit more reliable. They do have droughts, but I don't think it's quite as variable as Queensland.
Selling up was a big decision, as Rob and Sally had lived in Felton in southeast Queensland for 23 years.
I got 40,000, I got 40,000, 45,000.
As they planned to travel light, they held a clearing sale. It gave them a chance to say their last goodbyes to locals, as well as offload many years' worth of farming stuff they wouldn't need.
It's a really sad day today. We've been here for 23 years and we've brought our children up and we love this space, but we just think it's time to have a new adventure in life and head down to where it rains regularly. Right or not.
And Rob, you and Sally came here from Scotland to get away from the cold. Now you're headed to Tassie.
Well, yeah, maybe we overdid it a bit. It's getting pretty hot around here. So, yeah, it'll be a challenge and a change. And as regards it being a sad day, it's sad in many ways, but we're also selling machinery and there's some old things that have given me all sorts of trouble, so I'm quite glad to see the back of them.
This was just given to me a few minutes ago by Emma, who's a neighbour, and it says to Sally and Rob, "Thanks for being a great neighbour." I knew I'd cry. From Emma, Jacob, Kath and Mike. And thanks for being a great neighbour. Hope you have a good time in Tasmania. Send Emma a Tasmanian devil. And she's drawn a picture of a lovely horse. So that's lovely. It's those special little things that make it tricky.
The move south was prompted by the McCreths' unease with the changing climate in their district, which was making farming harder. But it was sealed after they visited King Island to holiday with former Queenslanders and fellow beef producers David and Jill Raff. The Raffs, sick of years of dry weather, sold their cattle property at Miles in 2016 and moved their Angus stud cattle to King Island. Their son and his family moved too, and all have been as happy as their cows were the day they were let into their new, lush, green paddock.
It was drought at home, it was hot, and I was sitting in the back of the car as we were driving around looking at their cattle, and the cattle were happy, there was green grass, and I started thinking to myself, well, do we have to stay where we are? You know, our children have grown up now, and we don't have to stay there forever. By the time we got back to Queensland, we decided that we would sell up and go somewhere. Not King Island, we just felt it was too small. We'd never been to Tasmania, so why don't we go down to Tasmania and have a look? And as soon as we got down here, we thought, well, we could easily live here.
But leaving Felton was difficult, as it is an extraordinarily close community. When a coal mine threatened the district 8 years ago, locals mobilised to fight it. It was farmers versus miners. And in a rare win, they stopped the mine being approved on Felton's prime agricultural land. Sally and Rob were instrumental in the fight and establishing the Felton Food Festival, an event set up to celebrate the soil the community saved.
Come on, girls.
The food festival attracts thousands and is now an entrenched part of the region's farm and food tourism calendar. In Queensland, they had over 1,000 hectares. Their new farm in Tasmania is just 230.
We were quite surprised. There weren't many farms on the market for the sort of things we wanted to do, and we imagined us taking on a place that was set up, but this is a more development project because it was a forestry plantation, so we've had to do a lot of work with infrastructure that we hadn't planned, but it's interesting, and yeah, we're making progress.
Do you think they're laughing at us?
Probably.
The farm was a clean slate, so top of the to-do list was putting in paddock fences and installing watering points so they could get cattle onto their grass quickly. Tests showed the soil was depleted, so they're improving soil fertility and establishing new pastures. As it hadn't been used as a farm for some time, the house and outbuildings were run down. But the McCrests are undaunted by the work ahead.
These sheds, everything's a little bit run down, but we could just see the potential of rain and green grass and beautiful undulating hills and the trees. So we knew that if we just put a bit of hard work into it, that it would be a beautiful place at the end.
This will primarily be a grass-fed Angus beef cattle operation, but Rob is considering converting to organics down the track. There's also a variety of high-value niche crops he's interested in growing, like poppies, hemp and potatoes. But he's firm on one thing: machinery isn't his thing.
I'm not very good mechanically. I'm an average driver of machinery, but fixing things, very bad. My welding is legendarily bad. But luckily there were a few people around there that could fix things when I broke them. Yeah, here, back to livestock. I like working with animals. It's just good to have a bit of a change, really.
Their new yards are their pride and joy. Designed by influential American animal welfare consultant Temple Grandin. Having minimal infrastructure was challenging, but the flip side is fences, roads and yards can go exactly where Rob and Sally want. They're building up their herd with top quality genetics. And Landline's visit was perfectly timed to see 3 new bulls arrive from Landfall, a well-known Tasmanian Angus stud.
It was a pretty hot sale, so they're quite expensive. So we hope we get lots of calves from them and good cows.
Sally, Andrew, the truck driver.
Yes.
You guys have got something going on there.
Well, he's married to a Sally and she breeds belted Galloways. So when I've got Rob pliable, will be some belted Galloways will be arriving. I just have to talk to Sally first.
Are you going to resist this or not?
I think I might have to give ground on the belties as long as I dig my heels in on the pigs.
Little steps.
Boundary fences are the next priority, especially as they faced an unexpected problem: pasture-loving wildlife.
The wallabies here are very small in comparison to Queensland, so we sort of laughed when we heard people complaining about wallabies, but there's millions of them, and they live in the forestry. So we've got forestry plantations as neighbours, so they sleep there and then they come and eat grass on our place. So we can fence them off, luckily, but it's quite a lot of work and expense, so a fair bit of that to do.
The McCreths discovered they aren't the only mainlanders who've moved to Tasmania because of concerns about the changing climate and the cost of water.
Fairly common, and a lot of people who live here, they know what it's like here, so they're not surprised.
And I think also with the drought going on so horrifically in Queensland and New South Wales, that as soon as you say, well, we've come because of climate change and we wanted somewhere with a reliable rainfall and climate, and everyone sort of agrees.
It's going to get hotter and there's going to be more extreme weather events, and I think every farmer needs to get acquainted with the best information and plan ahead. You've always got to keep planning ahead.
I don't think you can go from living somewhere where the climate is unpredictable and you worry a lot about when it's going to rain, and to come down here and think, oh, she's apples and we won't have a worry again, because I do worry that, climate change is not just up in Queensland and New South Wales. Climate change is a global thing, and, what sort of an effect is it going to have down here? So I suppose I don't want to take for granted this paradise that we're living in with rain and grass too much for granted, because maybe the rain's going to get less.
The old house was given a quick makeover to make it livable, but Rob and Sally have picked a site with a spectacular view of the Western Tiers for a new, much warmer home. How long did it take you to pick this spot for the house?
It didn't take long, because with the view,
I think we'd worked out the spot even before we'd bought the place. We thought this would be just ideal for a house. There are a couple of other spots, but this is just ideal. Any time of the day, the views of the mountain changes and you get the different light shining, you get the different angles and facets. It's just beautiful, and it's so peaceful and quiet.
And the view out this way is pretty good too.
Oh, yes.
Snow fell in the first few weeks of arriving in Deloraine, and they confessed to wearing beanies and gloves inside the house in their first chilly winter. But the McCreths have not regretted their decision to move once.
I like the environment, the clean water, amazing clean water. It runs off the mountains, the clean air, the native forests. It's just amazing what Tasmania has. If I may say so, I think quite a few people who live here don't quite appreciate what they've got, and a lot of farmers we've met just hate trees with a passion and would like to wipe them all out straight away. But you can just see the boom in tourism. So many people come from overseas because it's such a clean environment, and that's partly why the food industry here is doing so well, because look at the environment in lots of other countries, Asian countries, particularly where pollution is so bad and people don't trust their own food production. So it's something that's really special about Tasmania, and it really needs looking after, I think.
The McCreths have been warmly welcomed by their community, and while the work ahead can be measured in years, not months, they're revelling in the much wetter, more reliable, cooler climate. As for Sally, who put in many years of work to get the Felton Food Festival off the ground, she can't quite believe she's landed in another food bowl.
Where we live, we're in the centre of this massive variety of food that's produced. We've got dairies, truffles, winery, 41 degrees south salmon farm, berries. It's all just here. I can just go 10 minutes in any direction and buy something straight from the farmer.
Their fear they'd find it hard to fit in has proved unfounded. They have a new circle of friends, both locals and other mainlanders who've made the tree change. Do you want Tassie to implement some new immigration laws now, Sally, now that you're here?
Yes. I think we're here now, and let's not let anyone else in. Let's just keep it Tasmania as beautiful as it is. But that's a little bit unfair.
That's a bit mean.
Yeah, that's right. Normally I'm an open borders person, but it's lovely. And the people in Tasmania, everyone's so friendly and trustworthy. You know, you can just leave your car unlocked when you're in town. It's just is a lovely, relaxed, respectful place.
Best of all, though, like their friends the Raffs, the ever-present anxiety about weather and climate has abated, leaving just the normal stresses of farming for them to deal with. Did you know Landline's on Facebook? Our reporters are always out and about visiting fascinating places. We'll take you behind the scenes and we love to read your comments. There's plenty to interest and entertain. Just search ABC Landline.